Hi, I'm Josh Hostler, and I'm the priest at the Episcopal Church of the Good Shepherd here. I want to sincerely welcome you all to this workshop, which we've been planning for some time. You know, I met Aaron Gardner through a mutual friend, a pastor, and I don't even remember all the origins of it, but we just kind of struck up a conversation on Facebook and just found that we had a lot in common, and occasionally we'd go out for coffee and talk about deconstruction. And then Aaron came to me a few months ago and said, would the Church of the Good Shepherd like to host a workshop? And I said, absolutely. As you come into this space, I don't know what situations you're coming from. I don't know if when you thought about walking into a church, your stomach tightened up, right? I don't know what that's like for you. And so I just want to assure you you're safe here, and to, in all sincerity, welcome you here wherever you are, wherever you find yourself in relation to Christianity, you are welcome here. With that, I just want to introduce Aaron Gardner, who will introduce our first speaker. Aaron?
Thank you. Thanks, Josh. Good afternoon, everybody. We are so thankful that you can be with us here today. This is our event, God, Sex, and Healing After Deconstruction. This event developed pretty organically over the last few months after we learned that Tom Oord would be speaking at some other conferences in the Seattle area this week. It was our first speaker, Michael Camp, who actually came up with the idea of organizing our own sort of mini conference or workshop and suggested to me some other speakers, and the ball just started rolling from there. Our first speaker this afternoon will be Michael Camp in a talk titled Heal from Toxic Religion and Flourish Spiritually. Michael is a non-religious spiritual director with a certification from the Center for Non-Religious Spirituality. As a former evangelical missionary and church leader, he uses his coaching practice, Faith Transitions, to help people deconstruct, heal, and rebuild a healthier, more historically accurate way of following Jesus or a new philosophy of life. He is the author of 4 books, including Breaking Bad Faith and Craft Brewed Jesus. His most recent book, Faith Funk, is an ex-evangelical's guide to freedom from religious trauma and the depression, anxiety, and confusion that often stems from it. Please join me in welcoming Michael.
Yeah, you can take that.
Here you go, Michael.
I've got this one. Good afternoon, everyone. Am I on there, Dina, for the recording? Yep. All right. Good to see everyone. Welcome to a safe haven for anyone questioning or deconstructing high control religion. I want to thank Josh for opening up the church. You know, when we first approached him, I was a little curious if he was going to really accept us. You know, it's like God, Sex, and Faith Deconstruction, and my book has a picture of a church that looks like it's on fire and someone's running out of it. Is this guy going to let me into his church, you know? So, but, you know, when he heard about our content, he was like, oh, yeah, we want to hear about that. So I really appreciated him making it clear that we have a safe haven here. Unfortunately, as you know, that's not the case for many churches. So what we're going to do today is answer some questions like this. What is toxic religion and its impact on us? And think about this. Have you ever experienced or observed things like hell anxiety, rapture anxiety, faith based on fear, a retributive image of God who seems to be two-faced? One day he's loving his enemies, and the next he's drowning the whole planet and consigning 3/4 of the human race to eternal damnation. Or have you experienced LGBTQ rejection, misogyny, critical thinking denial, religious manipulation, hyper-purity culture, spiritual abuse, Bible worship, or conditional love? When you try to leave a toxic faith, fundamentalism or evangelicalism, have you struggled with things like guilt, shame, grief, confusion, cognitive distortion, disillusionment, depression, or anxiety? Have you deconstructed your faith or wondering if you should, or if you should more? Have you lost a sense of purpose in your life? Are you trying to come to terms with it all and rebuild something that allows you to think for yourself and pave a path that makes sense to you? So today we're going to take a journey together and address these things and talk about how to find healing and peace after or during a faith deconstruction experience. My name is Michael Camp. I'm a recovering conservative evangelical. I was in the evangelical movement for over 25 years among Baptists, charismatics, who I like to call charismaniacs now, and Calvinists. I was a youth group leader, home group leader, deacon. Once I was jailed for 3 days as a pro-life activist. I spent 7 years as a missionary and aid worker and doing church planting among Muslims in Africa. And I was spiritually abused several times and observed it over the years. And I got burned out trying to save the world in a system that caused me very serious damage. I started deconstructing my faith, and then I spent the next 20 years doing the work to understand exactly what happened here, what happened in my life to get me to where I was. And I realized millions of people are sitting in the same room that I escaped from, but they don't have a map. And so over the years, I started writing, I have a podcast, I started spiritual coaching practice, and today I'm going to share a map with you to guide you how to escape and to come out, and as my subtitle of my book says, How to Break Free from Toxic Religion and Reboot a Healthy Spirituality. So buckle your seatbelts. We're going to go on a journey here, and we've got a handout that if you don't have it, it's available right here, and you're welcome to come up and get one if you don't have one, or someone can pass it out. And we've got 7 areas on this map that we're going to cover. And the first one is identify toxic beliefs. And I'm sorry, but I'm going to give lots of shameless plugs. So on my book, Breaking Bad Faith, this one right here, I went through 12 toxic beliefs, or what I call frauds among fundamentalism. And today we're just going to go through 4 of them. And I call them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The first one is original depravity. And that's the notion that we were all born evil, we inherited the sin of Adam, there's nothing we can do about it unless God intervenes. Our default destination is hell because of this condition that we have. And I'm not going to go into details about that particular belief system, but that's the gist of it. The inerrancy of the Bible is the next one, and that's the notion that the Bible is 100% true. You can't question it at all. It's internally consistent, even though I can see contradictions in it, and I just have to accept that. It's universally applicable, and you just have to go along with it. And that's a belief that causes cognitive dissonance in people, and seeing like a two-faced God because of the contradictions that they see. The third one is penal substitutionary atonement, or PSA. God can't forgive without violence, without an appeasement to God through the sacrifice. It's a way of looking at the cross that if you look at it historically, you see that it's really warped. And then the final one is the doctrine of hell, which is, of course, the final destination for anyone who doesn't jump through the right religious hoops, etc., doesn't believe the right things, and so forth. And every single one of these things, you can, from history or from good biblical scholarship, you can show that each of them are very warped. They ignore the Eastern Christian view on original sin, for example. They ignore the original view of sacred texts among Jewish people in the time of Jesus. They ignore the fact that PSA atonement theory was a very late atonement theory. It started in the 12th century. And then they ignore all the evidence for debunking the doctrine of hell and all the Greek translations of words and the patristic or the church fathers' history of promoting universalism. So altogether, they form this worldview that you were declared evil at your core, you deserve hell, you need a substitute to die a torturous death, in order to be forgiven, you need to accept the whole Bible as true, or you're considered rebellious. You must adhere to legalistic purity and religious codes of conduct, or else. And 3/4, 7/8, or 15/16 of the whole world, depending on who does the math, is going to hell, or is consigned to hell at the end of time. So this is the foundation of this toxic, abusive religion. And like I said, there's other toxic beliefs, but these are kind of like the foundation that go off into other ones. Like, for example, the misunderstanding about homosexuality comes from the inerrancy of the Bible belief. So that's the first area that we're looking at here. And how to heal from toxic religion, of course, identify what is the toxicity that we're talking about. The second area in this map is called Call Out Spiritual Abuse and Religious Trauma. And so I'm going to read these things that are examples from my clients that I help coach in my practice, or they're just very common complaints that people have after coming out of a high-demand religion or fundamentalism or something similar. My pastor, church, betrayed me. I was spiritually and emotionally berated and abused by people in my church. My theological questions were not taken seriously, or they were met with pat answers. My wife and I were interrogated, criticized, and kicked out of my leadership role at the church. I was told I had to go through gay conversion therapy to be right with God. I saw contradictions in the Bible that bothered me, but that others told me to ignore. I had low self-worth and self-trust because of what I was taught on original sin. The church had an authoritative style of leadership they claimed was biblical. The apostles and prophets in my charismatic church ended up caring more about their institution than victims of sexual abuse or spiritual abuse. As a woman, I wasn't allowed to teach in the church except other women or children. I became frightened of a retributive God after my childhood experience receiving corporal punishment, and for another person after being taught that God's violence in the Old Testament and the book of Revelation was literal and factual and part of God's wrath. Love became conditioned on the believing the right things and following the right codes. I was told to stay in a dangerous, abusive marriage because divorce is a sin. Purity culture became an obsession in my church. Just loving people was never enough. The church became too political, demonized dissenters, and embraced Trumpism. So those are some examples of it people go through. And, the question is, what kinds of spiritual abuse did you experience? Or what have you seen others have experienced? And so the second area that we're talking about is calling out the spiritual abuse and recognizing it for what it is. The third area is deconstruction, faith deconstruction. And really, once people really are really suffering from one of these toxic beliefs, that's when they start thinking, maybe I should deconstruct, maybe I should look into this closer, although they may not use that word in the beginning. So the first thing to keep in mind is give yourself permission to deconstruct your faith, to question things. There's nothing wrong with that. In the spiritual coaching world, we have a term called hermeneutical injustice, and that's when you're prevented from having access to alternate scholarship and historical studies that contradict the evangelical or fundamentalist, theology. And so you don't know, every time you pick up a book, that might be contradicting evangelicalism, oh no, that's dangerous. Oh no, he's a false prophet. They're a heretic or whatever, and you're just sheltered from all that. So the first thing is open up your world to look into other scholarship and history and so forth that can open your mind to see that there's another paradigm on these things that you weren't made aware of. So as I say here in the handout, swapping out the bad theology for the good is critically needed, but it's not enough. And the reason for that is, anyone a fan of The Naked Pastor? We got some Naked Pastor fans. Okay, you can see a couple cartoons there. So you look at this woman, and she's like deconstructing, and there she is with these thoughts that keep coming up and flashing up. You're being so selfish. Deconstruction is just a fancy word for backsliding. No, you're betraying God. How dare you question God? Why are you turning away from the Lord? And my personal favorite, definitely going to hell now. So there are the thoughts. And this is a quote from one of my clients recently. He said, "My religious past is harping on me that I should have prayed about this decision. It wasn't God's will, maybe. I sinned, maybe. But I have discovered natural or non-religious explanations for this that make more sense. But I can't shake the religious voices. I want to not have to consciously always fight this." And so the lesson here is that swapping out, taking the bad theology aside and swapping it for good theology is important, but it doesn't erase the imprint that bad theology has made on us. And for some of us, it's years and even decades of just being in this certain church environment or spiritual environment where you're inundated with these beliefs, and they can take their toll. So healing from toxic religion is very important. And in my book, Faith Funk, there I go again, the shameless plug here. Faith Funk, I come out with a few tools that you can use to kind of quiet those voices and help you get to a place of peace. And the first thing I'll say about that is, if you still have voices, literal voices, relatives, friends, and family who are, berating you with these kinds of things, you need to draw boundaries, okay? It's perfectly fine to draw boundaries with people. If a family or friend or whoever, you can say, I still love you, I still want to have a relationship with you, but if you're going to berate me about this thing that we disagree with in theology, I'm going to have to cut you off, and we're not going to talk about that, or I'm going to walk away. And that's very important, or else you allow yourself to be continually abused and berated. But once you draw boundaries, you still might have those voices in your head. So let me share a couple of tools that might help you. The first one I call if-then philosophical statements. So this is the way it works. Okay, let's say you want to try to logically think through something, and you might come up with this statement. If God is real, then what would he or she be like? Okay, and you use your inner wisdom, your sense of what's good in the world, and your reflection on what love is like. And a possible answer would be God would be like a perfectly loving parent. Okay. If God is like a perfectly loving parent, then would he or she condemn lost children to hell? Would he or she, or would he or she seek to restore them, right? So you're thinking through something, and you're realizing, you know what, this doesn't really, if God is perfectly loving, how can it line up with something else that's not perfectly loving? And you're questioning that and coming out with a more rational conclusion. Another one would be if God is perfectly loving, like a parent, would he or she condemn me for having honest questions about using my sense of reason, which God gave me apparently, if I believe God created me and gave us all these capacities. So in that way, you use philosophy to help you overcome some of these voices that come and attack you in your head. Another thing is called mood charts. Now, when I was going through my deconstruction, I was probably about 3, 4, 5 years clinically depressed. And I had to go to some therapists, and they were Christian therapists, but they were at least a little bit more progressive in some areas. But they never told me about cognitive therapy because most of them had some kind of religious explanations for things. So on my own, I stumbled on a book that outlined what cognitive therapy is. And so I kind of did my own self-therapy using this book called Feeling Good by Dr. David Burns. And what cognitive therapy, one of the easiest things to do with this is you create mood charts. And mood charts are just like a page. You have 3 columns, and you have the negative thought, like maybe one of those negative thoughts that woman has. That's a negative thought. Then you label that thought as a cognitive distortion. Like, for example, a should statement. Anytime you have a should statement, I should have done something, that's a red flag. And I forgot to get the book with my bookmark in it, so I can't find the page that I'm going to look at. But there's other cognitive distortions like black and white thinking, right? Maximizing the negative and minimizing the positive. And I've come up with a list of religious cognitive distortions like a transactional faith or Bible worship, something like that. So you decide what the cognitive distortion is, and then you come up with a rational response. Now that I've learned some of these things from deconstructing, what would be a rational response that lines up with the evidence? This one, for example, the person who prayed and was feeling guilty because they didn't pray and they made a decision, they might come up with a rational response. God is like a loving parent who allows his adult children to decide for themselves. You don't always have to go back to daddy and say, oh, what should I do? What should I do, right? So, what parent would impose that on their adult children? So that's just one example of having a mood chart that might help you deal with one or more of those negative thoughts. I was making a lot of these charts when I was going through this. I was like, okay, I got 2 or 3 of them a day. I had writing them out and everything and going back and referring to them, and it really did help. So that's the healing from toxic religion. So moving along, the 5th area on the map is rebuilding and asking yourself, how do you decide what to rebuild? All right, so I'm going to give you the answer. Okay, it's really simple. You just read my book, Craft Brewed Jesus, How History We Never Knew Taps the Spirituality We Really Need. I've got all the answers in here for rebuilding. It's all right there, right? No. Just kidding. This is just my story, okay? There's other stories. Tom has a book called Faith After Deconstruction. I'm sure Susan has a lot of material and resources. Well, rebuilding something after these experiences. So the point is that if there's no one be-all, end-all reconstruction of faith. Rebuilding is something you choose for yourself. There's no one right answer to where faith deconsтрuctionists land. Many of us land in progressive Christianity or a more progressive church. Some others are like myself are done, where we're done with church, but we're not done with Jesus. We're not done. We might be done with the way of looking at that Bible that way, but we're not done realizing we think there's some of God's fingerprints on the Bible, and so forth. So it's not like any Richard Rohr fans here. Oh, look at those hands, right? Okay, it's not like we all go down to New Mexico and join Richard Rohr's, retreat center and just hang out there all the time, right? Or maybe become a Tom Oord groupie and follow him around everywhere he goes, right? No, we get all these things together and we find out what makes sense to us. We do our own thinking for ourselves, And no one thinks exactly the same theologically, believe it or not. Even evangelicals, even fundamentalists. That statement of faith, there's going to be different. I remember reading that statement of faith when I was an evangelical, or when you hear someone preaching on the Bible, and I'd go, I don't believe it that way. I don't believe it that way. Right? But no one would openly share that, usually, because you didn't want to come across like you were doubting the church's statement of faith. In a rebuilding scenario, you want to have an area where you're free to doubt, question, agree, disagree, and you don't have to worry about that, okay? You're free to do that because you don't want to come up with another fundamentalist view, right? Go from one type of fundamentalism to another, okay? So that's really the lesson of rebuilding. And the other thing is you want to figure out, maybe asking the question, what matters most? What matters most in Jesus' teachings? What matters most in, the prophets? What was their lesson? What matters most in certain areas? And focus on that kind of a thing rather than on some, exact theological formula. So I also like this other cartoon of Jesus talking to the Bible thumpers there. That's a good example of realigning with the Bible. The difference between you and me is you use Scripture to determine what love means, and I use love to determine what Scripture means. I thought that was a really good one. So that's rebuilding. The sixth area is non-religious spirituality. And non-religious spirituality is very interesting. We have this sense, one of the things I learned is we have this sense that, we know what Christianity is, right? Yeah, you know what a church is, you know what a creed is, and you know what doctrines are and everything, and you might have it all figured out, you think you know what it is. And the interesting thing is, if you walked up to a serious historian of ancient religion and Christianity, they would tell you something like this: Christianity, the way we think of it, the way we perceive it in our modern world, did not exist until 200 years after Jesus. It's a really remarkable statement. So, for example, there was no New Testament about 100 to 200 years later. There was no sense, actually, if you look at the historical evidence, that there was infallibility in the Jewish sacred texts. There was lots of different versions even of this sacred text. There was no church hierarchy. There was no church buildings like this. There was no professional clergy, There was no seminaries, etc. You just could go on and on and on. Something was going on after Jesus walked the earth, but it wasn't what we think of as Christianity. It was something different. And so when you get a handle on that, you can use that as a kind of a guide. It's like, okay, that helps me see what matters most, because a lot of this stuff is just neutral, right? It's okay to have a church. It's okay to have, even a creed or whatever. But what we've done is we've made it so sacred, right, that we start to look down on people who don't do it that way. And that's where one of the problems is. So non-religious spirituality is when you focus on what matters most. And I like to say it's also when you disentangle Jesus from the church and religion. And this is really interesting when you do that. You take all the assumptions out of when you, like, let's say you were reading the Gospels. We have a lot of assumptions when we read the Gospels, okay? First of all, some of the words are mistranslated, and you can figure that out by reading some books on biblical scholarship. And you can also find out that without understanding the historical and cultural context, a lot of the ways we interpret certain passages are misinterpreted. And you can also make the argument that some of the things in the Bible are really wacky, you know. I mean, you know, really, be honest, you know. It's like, okay, you know, Joshua says, leave no survivors. Just go in there and kill everyone. You know, well, you know, there's all kinds of things like that, right? And you can find inconsistencies, of course, too. But, you know, you've got, you can look at these things differently and start to come out with a view that aligns with the way we know, not for sure, but it's probably the way it was in the first few centuries of the faith. So that is like non-religious spirituality, where you get yourself out of the paradigm of the religion of Christianity and start to think in terms of what was the actual essence of what was going on. So that is non-religious spirituality, and one of the things that's very helpful in doing this is what I call the practice of doing a spiritual inventory. So, you know, spiritual inventory would be like if you, on the left-hand side of a piece of paper, you put what were the toxic beliefs that I believed, what was the negative impact that it had on me, what am I learning that's different about it, and how is that going to impact my life going forward. And you start to get out of the religious realm and start to come up with something that's like, oh, okay, that's more simple, it actually makes more sense, and it can be very helpful. The seventh area on the map is spiritual coaching, how spiritual coaching can help. And one of the things I want to talk about is when you're in the midst of faith deconstruction, it can be very hard, and you might have very serious issues like depression, anxiety, panic attacks. I had a major panic attack once in the middle of my deconstruction when I first started, and you might need therapy, and that's fine. Get some therapy if you need it. If you can't cope with certain things, get a professional psychologist who understands religious trauma and toxic faith, and that's going to really help. If you're in a situation where, you know, okay, I have a therapist, but they don't really understand religion very well, you can, in addition to the therapy, you can get a spiritual coach or a spiritual companion, someone like myself who has a practice doing it and is certified in it, and they can be kind of coming alongside you, helping you out with the religious aspects of your struggles. And then I always like to give this analogy, and I think it's a really beautiful analogy for understanding what a spiritual coach, how a spiritual coach can help someone. A spiritual coach is kind of like a Sherpa guide, okay? So just imagine there's this very low valley, and that low valley is the valley of fundamentalism, let's say, okay? And you're stuck in that, and you've got some issues, and you finally realize, I need to do something. I need to deconstruct. I need to start climbing out of this thing. And you start climbing up this mountain, and you are struggling. It's a difficult thing, right? You're climbing this mountain, you're learning new things, but as you go on, you have friends or family or community that you're losing. You might even have your profession that you're losing. I'm convinced so many pastors out there in evangelicalism, they don't leave because they don't know what they're going to do. This is all I've done for 20 years. What am I going to do? Or, you know, if I leave the church, right? They're scared a little bit. So they just kind of plug along. But so you're going up this mountain, and as you go up there, you've never been up there before. You don't know what's in front of you. So the Sherpa guide comes alongside you and says, I've been up this mountain before several times, and I'm going to help you get up there, right? And I've got tools in my backpack that are going to help you, whether that's some of the tools that I'm I'm sharing with you today, or some of the other tools in my book. You know, there's tools that will help you to get through this. And also, I can tell you this is really steep, so beware of this area, or this is not so bad. Don't worry about this area. See, and kind of give you some clues to what to expect. But you're still choosing your own path. You're still choosing where to go. I'm not saying this is the exact way to do it, and that's the only way to do it. No. So the Sherpa Guide guides you up, and the beautiful thing is that every once in a while you come to a plateau, and the trees are gone, and you can look down and you can see this wonderful view. And that's the glory of it. It's like, oh, wow. And it might be like, God is more loving, gracious, uncontrolling, and inclusive than I ever imagined. And it's just a beautiful thing. You know, that's not the end of it, because you still have more to go to get up where you feel like you're in a place of more of a place of peace. But you have those times when you see the fruit of deconstruction. See, deconstruction, a lot of people make it into a dirty word. It's actually spiritual growth, okay? It's not a dirty word. It's you are growing spiritually and learning, and if you're coming out from one toxic belief system, you're hopefully going into a new level, but you're also understanding the people who are still back behind you in that valley, right? We don't want to look down on them. You used to be there, right? So that's important as well. So that's the idea of what a spiritual coach or companion, at least a non-religious one, can help you with. And that's what I like to build myself as a Sherpa guide, helping people to do that. So the other thing I want to close with is you might be also at a place where, and this is what it was like for me. Now that I've, left the church, and at least the church I was in, and I didn't really plug into a new church very well. It would trigger things, and that's another thing. People have triggers, right? And so I just decided to join a service organization called Rotary International. So that's my community. But I also didn't know what to do with things like prayer, reading the Bible, worship, all these things. So a spiritual coach can help you come up with practices that might help you find new ways of making yourself being a spiritual person than just going into church every day or whatever, every week. There's self-care practices. There's gratefulness meditation. There's compassion meditation. There's peacemaking, restorative justice, the practice of humility to replace certainty. There's loving kindness. What matters most to many people is love. So let's start practicing love and just focus on that for a while and see what happens. And it's amazing what can happen. One of my favorites is the art of listening. When you learn how to listen and really have empathy for people, you can actually spiritually fall in love with people. I have a chapter in my book called Spiritual Ecstasy that talks about that. So these practices can be very helpful, and they can replace some of the more rigid practices that you may have had from your fundamentalist past. So I want to stop there and give time for questions, because we're already at 3:44. So thank you for hearing my story.
All right. This is relatively informal. Like we're just a group of people hanging out here. So, does anybody have a question that came to mind already? All right. Okay.
No, take the mic for the recording. We're recording. I can repeat it too.
I'm Robert Cottrell. I'm Susan's husband, and we are with Freed Hearts. Just a little shameless plug like you did, so I don't feel too bad about this. We started out working with parents of LGBTQ kids, and then broadened that into those in the gay and trans community who had been hurt by the church. And then we moved from that into deconstruction work, and we have a lot of resources. They're all free, by the way. But one of the things that we do is we like to share memes and things like that on social media. And one of the ones I love is that the Bible is clear, 40,000 denominations can't be wrong. You know? So sums up what you were saying too. But I also have a question for you, and I so appreciate hearing this kind of thing. Sometimes when you get wrapped up in what you do only, and then you're on social media, you don't get this kind of feedback on social media sometimes. But I was wondering, in your practice, do you find that people are more afraid in this journey of how God might respond, or are they more afraid of how their church may respond?
Oh, that's a good question. Right. I think it's a combination because, people have this image of God. So there's this God out there that, like, for example, if you have a transactional view of God, if you get sick or something goes wrong, you might think that's a punishment from God, to get you back on the path, right? But then again, there's also fear of other people, and of course, if you've been spiritually abused or whatever, you know that people can be mean sometimes. They might be well-meaning about it because of their religious beliefs, but it doesn't come across that way. So I'd say both. Yeah.
Is there another question?
Yeah.
All right.
Go ahead. Yeah. There you go.
We deconstructed out of toxic fundamentalism.
Just
Okay.
The chin rule, right on your chin.
We deconstructed out of toxic fundamentalism, but one of the things I did bring with me away from that was the belief in a personal God. God as a personal being that wanted relationship with me. We now attend a very progressive, liberal Lutheran church, and everybody there believes in God as an impersonal force and not as a personal being. So I'm trying to figure out, am I wrong? Is this a toxic belief that I need to dump? But I really like him as a personal being. So
yeah. Well, that's a great question. I mean, I guess the question is, what kind of personal being is he? Is he, hey, you didn't pray before you made that decision, and you're not reading your Bible or praying enough or whatever. If transactional God is not, in my mind, not a good personal God, right? So I still believe in a personal God too, but I'm telling you, I hang out with too many charismaniacs who said, the Lord told me today, and, and all these things, and you find out they're just, some of them are just completely off the wall. And so, yeah, I don't know how to explain, but what you're just described is a good place to be, wondering where should I land on this, and not being so uptight if I don't know exactly what it should be at that moment, right? Yeah. Can I say something about that? Sure.
Okay, it's like the Aesop's elephant, that wherever you're touching, you're describing that part of the elephant, and it never describes all of the elephant. And we cannot possibly know God, creator, source, personal, in God's fullness. So whatever we know is just our microcosm. And I do see God as source, but God is also love. And I like the personal relationship too. And I say, oh, help me with this thing, or thank you for that thing. If I can't do that with God, then God as a force means nothing to me. But whatever empowers you in your connection to God, whatever it is a handle anyway. It's only your grasp on the concept of God anyway. So do what serves you. But the transactional God is right out.
Right.
That is absolutely, terrorizing. So, but I'm all for personal God, knowing God is source, the source of all too.
The character of God is not
So I just want to give permission by saying that.
All right. There's one up here, Aaron. Or there's one.
Yes, God is personal, and that's my belief and thinking. Because no two person is the same, No two person goes through or react to things the same. And that love and understanding and caring that he has is catered to each individual. We may be going through the same situation, but he knows that we don't react the same way. So he's not going to say, well, the solution to that is that you need to do this. You and you and you. It doesn't work that way. Not with God. At least in my view and the way I relate to him. In my profession, well, I'm retired now, it's kind of the same thing. I was a physician, and you may have 2 or 3 babies that with the same condition that were born at the same gestational age, and each baby reacts differently to the intervention that you do. And you have to cater it to that specific individual to get the results you're looking for.
Yeah.
And that is God.
That's a great point. Yep, we're all different. I think there's one more up here.
Yes. This might need to be our last one for now.
Yeah, my name is Mark Gamisqua, and my question, or I guess it's more sort of just me talking out loud, is the fact that I'm interesting in regards to. I'm trying to make this short because I'm long-winded, but I definitely do believe in being spiritually led, like following the Holy Spirit, especially in being part of a church. I am presently part of a church that is not affirming denominationally wise, but I did definitely sense the Holy Spirit calling me to that church. The local church is very much, in a way, affirming. My pastor is very supportive of me and my homosexuality. And what does that look like? But I guess I'm sort of in a position like, how do I go about being at a church that I know denominationally is, I hear all sorts of different things that are against me in a way, and yet at the same time knowing that like I don't sense God calling me out of the local church. And more than anything, I feel supported, but yet still I'm still trying to figure it out. Because then at some point, where do I kind of walk away based off of wanting to serve? But I know I'm not going to be able to serve.
Yeah, right. That's a good question. I mean, I know what that's like. You have one foot in and you have one foot out maybe, and it's like you don't know when to leave, but there's a community that you love there. And if you had an issue that had related to LGBTQ, experience, they may not be supporting you in that area, but maybe in other areas, if that's what I'm hearing you saying. And so, no answer really, except that you got to work it through, and maybe one day you'll decide I gotta find a place that supports me in this one area of my life. So. Okay.
Do you mind if I had a thought really quick?
Sure,
too?
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one other thought from my own personal experience. So, I mean, I attend a church that doesn't necessarily collectively share all of my own personal beliefs. I ended up going out for lunch with, the senior pastor after we had developed a relationship, built some trust together, and I just kind of laid it out. I said, this is just kind of where I land on this stuff. I want to make sure that this isn't going to cause division, that this isn't going to cause problems down the road. And, I can support what I believe, biblically, if we want to be that way. And thankfully, if you find a place where you are loved, where you are accepted, that's the most important thing. So it's really, I think it's primarily based on, how you feel. Are you accepted by the church? Because I will never forget the quote by the late, great Rachel Held Evans, who said, what makes the good news about Jesus Christ offensive is not who it keeps out, but who it lets in.